let's talk a little bit about the game on Saturday. My expectations going in, I thought, okay, number one, with the new rules, they aren't stopping the clock on first downs, that we were going to see less plays, and we did. I didn't like it. I hate it. Screw the rules makers. I want more football, not less. We'll talk about that in a minute. Number two, I thought J.J. McCarthy was going to be really, really good, and guess what? He exceeded, my expectations. I did think the running game would be better. At the same time, in talking to you, when they were rotating the tackles in scheme, and Drake Nugent, his first game as center at Michigan after playing at Stanford last year, Miles Hinton, I thought, looked a little bit clunky, and Carson Barnhart at left tackle has some work to do. Your overall thoughts on the offensive line and the running game, which to me was a little bit of a disappointment?
Well, the first series, right? So, you get a stop and they punt the football, and rule number one is a punt receiver, catch the football. So we start off and, 1st and 10 from your own 2. And I think we got maybe a yard before we punted. And here comes, it was like a flashback for me, Ballas. Linebackers darting. As soon as they see double teams, linebackers are coming, and there's guys loose in the backfield, and Corum or Edwards had nowhere to go. And all of a sudden we're punting out of our own end zone. So that was disappointing. But overall, the feeling that I had was, okay, having been there, done that, although 31 years ago, the first game it's not the same as any practice that Coach Harbaugh and his staff have put together. Game speed cannot be replicated in practice. So you just expect there's going to be a little clunkiness. There's going to be a little bit of fit and finish kind of things that are going on out there that aren't as clean as they will be in a month from now. And you're rotating in some tackles. You got Barnhart, who was used to being a right tackle guy. Now he's a left tackle guy in real live game speed. So none of that surprised me. None of that was like, okay. But Michigan's offensive line is talented enough that they did enough at times that was needed to move the football. I thought pass protection was average to be pretty good. Of course, the quarterback was outstanding, but we'll get to that in a second. But Nugent in center, I thought, he's not the physical guy that Olotimi was. He's not as tall and as long. But I see this guy, and I'm like, yeah, okay, I can see this. He again, I think we talked about in a previous podcast. He kind of maybe fits the Jeff Saturday kind of physical nature, maybe 6'2", little shorter guy, but that doesn't mean you can't be effective in there. So I guess the point that I would say, Ballas, is none of this alarms me. None of this makes me concerned, right? I think Hinton, I know Hinton in that game there, got a guy off. He had a one-on-one off the edge. He slowed his feet down, bent at the waist, give up a pressure. But JJ steps up, delivers the football, and off we go. So you don't see that kind of thing and registered as a sack, but it was a pressure. And so on that, score sheet that right there for Hinton, that's a negative. And those kind of little things, it's like week one. So none of it was all that surprising. I would call the Michigan offensive line in week one average, and that's okay. That's okay for week one. Now, in 2 or 3 weeks from now, average is not going to be good enough. You got to get better. And the cliches about week 1 to week 2 impressive or improvements, those will absolutely come along. And then whatever rotation Coach Moore's got going on with that group at the tackle position, that'll solidify here after the second game. And I would think by the third game going into the Big Ten season, we'll have a lineup that's set.
Yeah. How much of the rotation in camp with the tackles working with the ones is going to hinder the progress? And I'm not making any excuses for them, but I've heard it so many times, and I've seen it so many times with lines that play together forever, like the last couple of years, like yours in the early 90s, of guys that are so familiar with what one another are going to do that, man, you kind of know your every move. So a couple of these guys just got here, right? They didn't practice.
Yeah.
So, at least 2 of them, so it takes time, right, to gel. So it's one of those things where, your expectations were maybe a little bit too high in the opener, but by game week 3, week 4, this thing could be really humming.
It will be fine. So imagine your left guard or right guard. You're Keegan or your center. You're a veteran in there. You're the solid starter. You've been there, done that, and Barnhart played a lot of football last year for Michigan. So it's not a matter of capability. It's a matter of comfort and reps together. And so the point that you made just a moment ago is valid in that it just takes a moment or two and a week or two for things to kind of settle in, and the coaching staff makes their evaluations based on practice reps and game reps obviously being pretty important, And then by week 2 or 3, they've set a lineup, and then there's sort of this feeling in the room like, okay, everybody got their shot. We know who the starting 5 is. We know who the next tackle in the game is. We know who the next guard in the game is. If someone gets hurt at center, if Nugent gets hurt at center, who's the next guy in? That's all declared, and it's on the board. There's no more questions. There's no more battles. We know what the lineups are going to be, and that's when you'll see the offensive line kind of come together and feel like, okay, this is the deal, and now I know where you're going to be on this pass protection, and we can talk about things. If things go well, we can talk about things. If things don't go well, and you do that every day, and you break down the practice film and the game film, and it'll all just settle in. This is absolutely an expectation. We've seen it now since Coach Moore has been coaching this offensive line. In another 2 or 3 weeks, everything's going to calm down, and we should see far more consistency out of this offensive line, and everything will be fine.
How much concern that there wasn't as much push as maybe we expected? We saw down there in the red zone. Well, 2 things. Number one, we could see it. I could see it with the naked eye that ECU was not going to let Michigan run the ball. They had 11 guys running downhill at the snap. And when I asked Blake Corum about it, I said, were they filling those gaps? Kind of like TCU did a really nice job with that and slowing down the Michigan run. And I said, and he said, boy, were they ever. And he said he'd never seen anything like that. So that's number one. But number 2, even in those times, like down at the goal line, it didn't seem like they were getting the same push that they got last year. Now, 2 things on that. You talked about Olu, Timmy. That's a big dude. That guy was able to get some push, and it's going to be a little bit tougher for a smaller guy like Nugent because he doesn't have the poundage behind him, number one, as strong as he is. It's all about leverage, and I understand that. But it certainly helps. It certainly helps when you got a 320-pounder pushing compared to a 290-pounder. Number 2, the first 15 plays of each half are scripted. So that kind of threw things, I thought, on the first series when you're backed up. It didn't surprise me that they ran 3 times. I thought maybe they'd get 1 throw in there, but it seemed pretty clear to me that they were being on the conservative side, knowing that if something were to go wrong, and one of the only ways that this was going to be a ball game was if they made a big mistake down there.
Well, so the point you made about scripted opening series and second series being scripted is absolutely valid. We used to do that 30 years ago. Here's the plays we're running no matter what. And you sort of feel your way into a football game. And you've got East Carolina there selling out to stop the run. And it looked very similar, like I said earlier, of the TCU blueprint, which was as soon as those linebackers saw double teams, they were throwing gaps. They were darting gaps. And you got defensive linemen moving. This causes some challenge for guys that are trying to double team dudes. But, even so, the technique maybe wasn't all that clean. You got rotating guys. It's game speed. Everybody's amped up to a new level that they haven't had since last year. All these things combined makes it look a little clunky out of the gate. We kind of go, oh, wait a minute. I thought Michigan's offensive line was going to dominate from snap 1 to the end of the game. That's not necessarily how it goes. And you can go back over all the course of Michigan football history or any other offensive line in the history of college football that was at the end of the season great, at the beginning of the season maybe not so great, maybe average at times. And that's exactly what we saw Saturday in this football game. And so, again, Nugent may not have the physical stature as Olotimi did, but it doesn't mean he can't be as effective. Michigan has had centers that are a couple inches shorter, but just as effective. Of course, ideally, you want a 6'5" guy in there that's got long arms that can pass pro like a guard or tackle, but you don't have that. But it doesn't mean you can't be effective, and he will be. Yeah. So none of this concerns me again, Ballas. I don't get too worried about it. And the first series, I thought, that was kind of gross, but okay, whatever. We end up winning the football game. And then, we flip the script and we say, okay, so they sold out to stop the run. Well, great, super. What happened then? Well, our quarterback showed the kid's a stud. Mm-hmm. And we had some dudes downfield. We got a tight end. We got a slot guy. We got a wide receiver guy who's making plays everywhere. And what we talked about going into the season, Michigan must have to be better at, which was a more dynamic passing game, as I've said more time and time again now. There were certainly flashes of that. So it's like, okay, fellas, this is encouraging. Of all the things, I'm not going to get too excited, and I'm not drinking your blue Kool-Aid yet, Ballas, because the Kool-Aid dispenser starts.
Mr. 12-0.
Yeah.
who's handing out the Kool-Aid this year?
Well, there's expectations, but I'm not going to get too excited about what we've seen here, certainly in week 1. But I will say that watching that quarterback move around in that pocket, keeping his eyes up and downfield, and instead of looking at his pass protection, feeling it and moving around in the pocket and slinging that football on a dime. It was like, okay, we got a stud here at quarterback. Clearly, we have a stud at quarterback. How do we keep this kid healthy through the course of a football season? Clean up that pass protection so he doesn't have to move around as much. And if this is a flash of what we're going to see throughout the course of the season in this passing offense, then this changes the game for the expectations of Michigan when they get to the playoff.